hopefully everyone can see the slides. Um, yeah, so I'm going to be talking about looking after our mental health and a little bit about me, first of all. It's me and my dog, Kiffle. So I'm autistic. Um, I use they, them pronouns. I'm based in Edinburgh. I'm a person-centered counselor, and I also do some supervision and training. I also actually do a bit of writing and research around mostly autistic people's experiences of mental health and things that can help us, basically how therapy can help us and how other types of support can help us. Um, I'm a co-founder and I'm former chair of AMAZE, which is the Autistic Mutual Aid Society Edinburgh. Um, I sort of mentioned some of the research I did around autistic people's mental health already. Um, and yeah, I also write a bit about gender identity, and I'm trying to write more about small things that we can do to support ourselves. So whether it's about kind of inertia or getting stuck in sort of thoughts and loops of thoughts. So there's some links to that. What I think what I'll do is I'll send the slides through so that you can get a copy of it at some point. I'm also a fan of mushrooms and bugs and birds and just looking for creatures out in the woods. Um, that's a little bit about me. So, what to expect for this talk today? I hope I'll be able to cover it all. I sort of did a similar talk, I think, a year or two ago, and I've changed it a little bit since then. So I hope the timing will work out. But I'll start off talking just a bit in general about mental health, what it is. That might seem kind of obvious, but hopefully there'll be a little bit of extra information in there for folks. Some things that might impact us, and I specifically impact us as autistic people. Um, some clues that we might be struggling with our mental health because it's not always obvious. Um, I want to introduce a concept called the window of tolerance because I think it's a really useful metaphor to use. I certainly find it really helpful for myself and for the people I work with. It might be useful for you. Um, Identifying the causes, so identifying what's impacting us and sort of starting to think about what we can do about it. So a bit about feelings and then a bit about things that can help. And then at the end, if we have time, a little bit about types of help that are out there and also about looking after each other, because I do think that as autistic and neurodivergent people, we're often part of communities of other people who are also struggling and where we can, it can be difficult, but we can also really want to try and support each other. So if we get time, I'd like to talk about that a bit. Let's see how things go. Okay. So what is mental health? I'm not going to just read off the slide, but hopefully this is kind of there for those of you who find like reading a little bit easier than auditory processing, and you can have this later as well. But basically, mental health is about the sort of well-being of our minds, right? How we feel internally, how we feel psychologically. It's very closely connected with how we feel in our bodies. To me, feelings and emotions are very much like connected. They're very much connected to our physical sensations. So it sometimes can be a bit confusing, can be difficult to know, like, am I feeling, for example, chronic pain and that's leading me to feel down and depressed? Or, am I feeling depressed and anxious and that's causing chronic pain? So those things can be very connected. Um, I think it's important to say that autism is not a mental health condition. We quite often, you might see it sort of lumped in with mental health conditions, but autism is a neurological difference. It's a different way of being. It's a sort of it can impact our mental health. So being autistic, there tends to be correlation between being autistic and struggling with mental health difficulties and having things like depression and anxiety. But autism in itself is not a mental health condition. And I think one of the things that I feel is quite important that we are starting to talk about more, but still not quite enough, is that the way that autism is often framed, so the way we might hear about it from diagnosticians or particularly from people who present the sort of more medical model, is it's describing an autistic person who's in distress. So it might be talking about a person who really struggles with change, for example, right? Or a person who has meltdowns, a person who has like very intense sensory sensitivities. And yeah, we might have those things irrespective of whether our lives are going well or not. But I also think that a lot of those things can be worse when our mental health is not great. So quite often I think that our image in society of an autistic person is often a distressed autistic person. And what I'd like to sort of do is think about how we can sort of work with and support that in ourselves when we are that distressed autistic person. But also, can we start to imagine what a happy, what a happy, fulfilled autistic person might look like? What is that version of that for ourselves? Um, I sort of talked a bit about mental health being connected with physical health. Something else that's relevant here is that a lot of us, as autistic people, also have a lot of co-occurring conditions, right? We might deal with chronic pain. I have EDS, for example, which is a connective tissue problem, which means that I get a lot of joint problems and pain. A lot of us have digestive issues, maybe difficulties with sleep, and that also impacts our mental health. So I think it's really important that we understand that mental health is part of our whole body and connected to our whole body. It's not just all in our heads. Um, and another thing to say is that everyone will encounter difficulties with our mental health at some point in our lives. So it's you know, I think we used to have this kind of idea that um, I think it's quite a sort of pejorative way of talking about it, but that a person goes mad or a person loses their mind or something like that, and really it's we all spend time struggling with our minds, right? It's difficult being beings with feelings and connecting with other beings with feelings, and particularly when we are minorities in this world, we can really struggle. So that connects to what can impact us. And I originally had a sort of list of what can make our mental health worse and what can make it better. And that seemed redundant, actually. Let's just talk about things that can impact our mental health in any direction. So, obviously, change. I think it's probably fair to say that most of us will have feelings about change. And I mean, by most of us, I don't just mean autistic people, I mean people in general. And yeah, like a lot of autistic people really struggle with change. And that can be positive change and it can be, negative change as well, right? It could be a good new thing that's happened, or it could be the loss of somebody or something. Um, and that change can be good for our mental health. Like, you maybe you get a new job that you really like, or you move to a place that really suits you, or it can be bad for our mental health. And that doesn't always tie with whether the change is positive or not. Like sometimes we can get into a new situation but feel overwhelmed by just the fact that it's different. So I think it's okay for it not to sort of necessarily make direct sense immediately. I sometimes work with people who might say, like, this was supposed to be a good thing, so why do I feel terrible about it? And like that can happen, like because change is the bit that we're struggling with, not necessarily that we don't want the thing. Um, of course, lack of change can also be a problem when we feel stuck when we're in a not ideal situation. And that kind of links with having external or internal pressure as well. So it could be that we're in a situation where there are people who are expecting things of us or work expecting things of us, and that can lead to exhaustion and burnout, for example, or it can lead to us not really being able to be ourselves. So masking, for example, which I'm imagining is a term that you're all familiar with. Um, we might also have internal pressures. So those could be things that we grew up or we sort of internalize believing that we need to be able to do. So things that we feel are important to being a good person or important to our sense of identity. Some of those are things that maybe we internalize that have not been that helpful potentially, right? So potentially ideas around what's okay to be that we're not able to fit into. Uh, so, for example, I um, used to think that there was something wrong with me that I couldn't hear people very well. I have auditory processing difficulties, and I used to think that I was just a bad person, that I didn't really care. Um, and once I realized that auditory processing difficulties were a thing, I was able to lose that expectation of myself. But before that, I felt really bad about myself in social situations. I thought that maybe I just wasn't good, like there was something wrong. So these internal pressures can really impact how we feel as well. Obviously, I mentioned physical health and co-occurring conditions. And obviously, the flip side of that as well is that when we have good physical health or when we have access to that, we can feel good. So I rely a lot on physical exercise these days. I know that doesn't work for everyone. It's something that I found helps me a lot to regulate now. And when I'm not able to access it, I have a really bad time. And yeah, access to interests and downtime is important. Something that I think we're starting to talk about more for autistic people, particularly, is that we have often, and not all of us necessarily, but we have a sort of a need for the ability to focus intensely on things that interest us. And I think maybe a lot of you might connect with this feeling of like when you have something that you really want to focus on and you're not able to focus on it, it can feel devastating. It can feel really difficult. Um, and it can range from being frustrating and difficult to focus on anything to actually feeling really depressed or angry. And getting downtime as well can be really important. And that downtime, we'll talk a bit about that later, but it might look different from how neurotypical society mentions downtime, right? It might not be, I don't know, for example, I hate taking a bath. It just feels sensorily horrifying to me. So it might not be the sort of um, typical idea of self-care or relaxation. It might be something very specific to you. And of course, sensory differences and sensory needs are really important as well. They can really impact our mental health. When we have access to good sensory feelings, like when I have clothes that feel really nice and cozy and warm and soft, but not too warm, obviously. Um, when I have a room that doesn't feel too cluttered, when I don't have bad noises, it can really help me feel really regulated and good. Um, and the opposite, like not meeting my sensory needs, I can feel bad, right? I'm using good and bad in a very simplistic way at the moment, but obviously it's often more nuanced than that, right? It can um, depend a lot on what your state is in that moment. Some more things. So kind of broadening out a little bit, um, I think it's really important for us as humans to feel that we have a sense of fulfillment or purpose. And that doesn't need to be a big thing. It doesn't need to be like necessarily like I have achieved my ambition in life. But I think a lot of us do feel a need to feel like we have a sense of value, whether that's just internally, like I'm okay, I get to exist, I'm good as I am, or feeling like we have a sense of value to others, to our community, to the world. And whether or not we have that sense can impact our mental health. It can impact how we feel about ourselves, our sense of belonging, our sense of connection. And alongside that, obviously, companionship and intimacy can be important. And that is very much connected to our own specific needs around that as well. I think there are a lot of normative expectations about companionship, about what relationships and friendships should look like. And a lot of us need something different potentially. Some autistic people, for example, need a lot of alone time, but want a bit of time with people. Um, some of us maybe really appreciate a lot of quiet time with other people. And some of us maybe need a lot of, for example, time to share passions or info dump. And intimacy can look very different as well. It can be, some of us like a lot of touch. Some people like very little touch. So when we get the type of intimacy or companionship that's right for us, that can be really helpful. And when it's not quite right for us, even if it might look right for society, it can impact us. And that connects with belonging and understanding as well. So when we feel a sense of belonging, when we feel understood, I mean, maybe this sounds kind of obvious, right? Like we feel better about ourselves, we feel more connected. And I think this is something that I think does impact a lot of us as autistic people is this feeling of not being understood, not being represented in society. And it can really shift when we're in spaces like this, right? When we're around other autistic people and we feel connected. Um, I think I added access to accommodations in here because it's sort of I sort of touch on it already in a lot of what I talked about, but I think it's important just in a sense of um, if you think about the world as being not designed for people who are different, not being designed for autistic people, for example, um, then having space within that is more designed for us, that is more suited for us, can be really helpful, right? It's being in a space where things are easier. And what I'd like to do a bit more in this workshop, in this talk, is talk about how we can start to make things easier. Um, and also how we can sort of start to feel better within ourselves as well, because how we feel about ourselves is something that can really impact how we feel, right? And that can be impacted by our past experiences. It can be impacted by what's happened to us, things that people have said to us, traumatic experiences we've had, and it can also be impacted by things that happening at the moment, things that we either believe about ourselves or is being reinforced by others about ourselves. So yeah, all of these points are connected, and I think I sort of wrote this list partly as um, I think it's sort of useful. There's obviously more things that can impact our mental health, but it can be useful as a thing to check in on in terms of what are we missing when we're not feeling great, or what can we do more of even if we're feeling okay? What do we need more of in our lives? So sometimes I think when we're struggling with our mental health, it's not always obvious. I think something that I come across quite a lot, and I've experienced this myself, is I'll get to a point where it's already a crisis, or people might get to a point where it's already a crisis before the penny drops, right? Before it's like, oh no, things are actually really bad right now. And what I think can be really helpful is to try and capture before we get to that point. And that could be working on our own sensitivity around that, but it could also be recruiting people around us, whether we have friends, family, partners, to maybe notice that there's been a change, right? And if they are able to sort of sensitively bring that up to say, for example, you seem to be having a lot more meltdowns lately, um, or you seem really low energy lately, and you're not interested in the things you're normally into. What's going on? Um, I sort of put fight, flight, freeze, fawn, flop. What's the other one? Flood in here next to meltdowns, because that's the sort of that's the model for the fight or flight response, which is this idea when we kind of move out of our regulated space within our bodies and our minds, where we're able to make decisions and sort of process what's going on and move into a more instinctive part. So um, the function of that is, when a tiger comes out of the woods, we're running away before we've realized even process what's happening. So it allows us to keep ourselves safe. But in our world now, where we're not meeting many tigers in the woods, it can sometimes be a problem when we go into one of those Fs, right? So we might have an explosive, angry meltdown, for example, or we might shut down completely, or we might run away. One of the things I used to do quite a lot when I was a bit younger was to run away whenever things got overwhelming, and I would just disappear. And that was obviously very worrying for everyone concerned. And I think it's important to sort of recognize, because I think a lot of us might have a lot of shame around getting into this response, is that it's when we get there, we don't have very much control. And there are things that we can do to help ourselves, particularly like to set ourselves up for a better ride beforehand. But it's not an easy time for making big decisions. It's not a good time for making big decisions. It's not a good time for logical reasoning. Um, it's certainly not a good time for somebody to present us with like 12 different options. So it's really about surviving in that moment, so about kind of getting back to a point of regulating ourselves that we're able to feel safe enough to actually kind of go, okay, I'm all right now. I'm gonna do something different. Um, I'm not going to sort of go through these in too much detail because we have a lot to cover that I think can be will be a bit more useful for me to talk about. But certainly, these are all things that can um, signify that we're struggling a bit more. And some of the more subtle ones might be things like you notice that you're more sensitive to things that you're not normally sensitive to, or you're not normally so sensitive to. So, for example, when I'm having a bad day or I'm really overwhelmed, I can't sit on a bus and hear other people's phones playing without needing to get off the bus. And then I know that, yeah, I'm not really doing very well at the moment. And when I'm doing okay, I can put up with it. I don't like it, but I can put up with it. And yeah, like some people describe, not being able to tolerate certain foods, for example, when they're struggling and needing to rely on safe foods, for example. Um, I think some people, I made a note about it here, some people describe feeling more autistic. And that's sort of like in the sense that maybe the things that they see as being more autistic traits feel more exaggerated. So um, maybe there are more meltdowns. Maybe you stim more. You feel like more of a need to move in certain ways. Um, Maybe there's just more of a feeling of kind of getting stuck or struggling to switch tasks or struggling with change, for example, or really panicking at a change of plans in a way that you might not when things feel more regulated. Um, yeah, so how do we? I sort of talked earlier about the importance of kind of working with the importance of kind of working on that sense of sensitivity, working on being able to sort of be more sensitive to um, things changing in our emotional states. And I really like this concept of the window of tolerance. So I'm going to sort of introduce it to you. I'm just going to see, did I put the drawing or did I do the writing? Ah, I got the writing here. I'm going to bring up the drawing instead. So if you imagine the window of tolerance, if you imagine a window, like this big rectangle here, and everything within the window is you feeling okay, is you being able to tolerate things, or you've actually been quite okay with things. So, for example, everything within my window of tolerance when I'm feeling okay with the noise on buses is, yeah, buses are fine. Um, like I can handle sitting on the bus. I can handle noises happening around me. I can handle the movement, the vibration. Um, and everything outside of the window of tolerance is what gets me into that, what I described earlier as that fight, flight, freeze, other F's state. Right. So that's, for example, I've sort of simplistically put meltdown and shutdown here, but it could be other things. Um, so when I'm feeling regulated, it would take quite a lot to get me into a meltdown or a shutdown state. It would take, I don't know, like some really terrible catastrophe on the bus, all my stuff being stolen, maybe. Maybe even that would be okay. Um, some terrible, stressful news. Maybe very loud things going off in every direction for a long time. Um, that might take me outside of my window of tolerance, right? But when I'm having a difficult time, when when I'm really low on spoons, when things have been hard, just somebody playing a TikTok video out loud on their phone might send me into shutdown, right? Might give me a panic attack. Because my window of tolerance, if you imagine that rectangle, is much smaller. So how can we apply that to ourselves? How can we use this metaphor? Um, the way I think of it is if you think of sort of different things that you deal with in your life, you can kind of almost, depending on if you're visual or not, I sort of use it as a way to think about like how big is my window of tolerance for this right now. So, for example, I'm considering going to a party. How big is my window of tolerance for being around lots of people right now? Is it a bit too small for dealing with it at all? Is it big enough to handle it as long as I have a leaving, like a set time that I get to leave? Um, Is it that I can tolerate a few people but not too many, or I can tolerate people but I can't travel there? Or is it actually no, the window of tolerance is really wide right now. I feel okay. I can handle it. And as you notice, if you notice that that rectangle is smaller, that window is smaller, that's a clue that maybe your resources are more limited. Um, and also, if you notice it's wider, it's a clue that maybe you get to challenge yourself a bit more. Maybe you can take that risk today. And it doesn't have to be just in the moment or for a specific event. It could be, how do I feel this week? I feel like I can take on a bit more work this week, or I feel like I can take on more challenges this week. Or I feel like, actually, I can't handle very much. I'm going to be really careful this week. I'm going to schedule extra downtime. I use this incidentally, not just for mental health, I use it for physical health as well. So, those of you who deal with chronic pain, I think it can be really useful. It's like, how much mobility do I have today? Like, does it feel like I could do a run today, or does it feel like actually I need to sit down? I need to make sure I sit down. Um, it's good for fatigue as well. And one of the things that we can also do over time is work to expand that window of tolerance more. So we can look at ways to, so take note of what helps us keep that window open more. Take note of what closes it more. And it just gives a sort of framing, I think, that's kind of very simple, um, to help us get to know ourselves better, get to know how we manage overwhelm better, and within sort of outside of that, it's every kind of overwhelm, right? It's anything that sort of feels unmanageable. It's shut down, it's meltdown, it's fury, it's sobbing. It's all of the things that we're at a point where we can't handle anything anymore. Um, okay. Happy to sort of take any questions on this later as well. But I just think it's a sort of helpful analogy. So now that we're kind of building a sensitivity around how we're feeling or where we're at in the moment, and maybe we're identifying that, oh, things not quite right, it could be useful to think about the causes. That could be useful to think about what's going on. Um, Something that I know that a lot of us can struggle with is, how do we identify our feelings, or how do we put words to them? I don't know how many of you are familiar with the word alexithymia. So alexithymia, confusingly, I think, describes two slightly different things. It can describe our ability to identify what emotions or feelings are happening within us. And it can also describe our ability to communicate those emotions to other people. I think those are very different, but they are lumped under the same umbrella. And some people will struggle with one and not the other. Some people struggle with both. Some people neither. Um, I think that particularly when it comes to language, maybe with both, autistic people, because we feel things differently from neurotypical people, from non-autistic people, we're not always taught how to identify our feelings and how to communicate them. I don't think there's enough evidence to say that we innately just find we innately just have a difficulty with this. It's more that we're not always taught in a way that validates our feelings and that recognizes our feelings, because babies do need to be taught how to connect with their feelings and how to communicate them. And when our feelings are different, we don't always get, for example, the stories, right, or the cartoons that represent how we're feeling, or the sort of the help that we might get adults say, well, you can't feel like that. You like parties, or like, that's a nice thing. So why are you sad? Or similarly, like, why are you into that? It's boring. And those are all things that can kind of really undermine our sense of our ability to identify how we're actually feeling and who we are in ourselves. Um, One thing I find that can be helpful to like get us back to connecting with ourselves is, let's throw out emotional words completely. Unless you find them really helpful, we don't need to use emotional vocabulary at all. And we don't even need to sort of focus on this distinction between emotions and physical sensations. anything that we experience within our body is a feeling. Let's just work with that. So um, we can kind of start by going, okay, what am I feeling in my body right now? I might sort of describe this as like a body scan. So I might sit or, be comfortable and go, okay, am I sitting comfortably? What am I feeling at the moment? My ankle hurts a bit. I twisted it earlier. My seat's comfortable. I'm sitting comfortably. Um, I'm feeling a slight tightness up here. That's probably because I'm a little bit anxious that I'm keeping to time, and this is new, slightly new material for me. I feel a little bit flushed in my face. That happens whenever I do a talk, so that's normal for me. I'm a little bit thirsty, so I'm actually going to drink some of my juice. So you can hear, like in there, I've described a mixture of physical stuff and what we might classify as emotional stuff. And some of it is both, right? So that slight tightness in my chest is a physical sensation that I think has an emotional origin. Um, and we can sort of broaden that out as well. We can sort of go, okay, well, what's happening in my immediate environment? How does the room sound? Um, I love this. I love using kind of non-literal descriptions, and maybe that's more how I approach things. I know some people find that quite difficult, but for example, I might find a sound scratchy. Which, if I heard a scratchy sound, I would really struggle with that. I can just imagining it makes my hair stand on end a little bit. So if that was in my immediate environment, I'd be like, okay, that's a problem. There might be something, anxiety inducing in my immediate environment. In this environment right now, this is my office, and I made it kind of really nice for me. I've got Lego, I've got a comfy sofa, so I feel very comfortable in this environment. I feel quite safe, and the light is not too bright, which I like. You can broaden that out again. You can think about what's happening in your life at the moment. Are there things that are there thoughts that are causing a feeling inside you, whether it's a physical feeling or a thought, right? Is there a thing that's causing anxiety or a thing that's causing excitement? Is there something that you're looking forward to that you can't wait to happen and that's actually quite annoying? Or is there something you're really not looking forward to? And on a slightly broader scale, like what's happening more broadly? Are there worries about, you know, ambitions, broader ideas, jobs, health, relationships? And then more distant past and future, like stuff that maybe happened in the past that we're still struggling to process, or stuff that is in our future that we're worried about. All of these arenas, and there might be other areas as well in our lives, are things that we can. I mean, I sort of haven't mentioned here maybe feelings we have about our other relationships, for example, relationships with other people and with pets and other beings. Um, but sort of looking at these different arenas maybe can help us kind of start to think about what feelings we have, what feels okay and what doesn't feel okay. I think of it almost as like um, think of it. I've got a very sensory example in my head right now. This is an example of how I think about feelings. I imagine like running my hand over like a smooth clay pot or something, like glazed clay pot. I can't handle unglazed pottery. And, everything is really smooth and lovely. And then I notice just one little bit that catches my hand. And that bit's not so lovely. Or like that bit's noticeable. And that's sort of my way of scanning myself in a way to go. And not everything is that smooth really in my life, but like that's one way of noticing if something stands out, right? To go, okay, yeah, like right now my ankle's been hurting for a couple of days. That means I can't go running tomorrow. That's worrying. I don't like that. Right. So that's a bit that's catching. Um, this is just a very quick sort of example. I put this in a few years ago, actually. I still quite like it, that we can use lots of different ways to talk about our emotions. Before I became a therapist, I was an illustrator, so I used to draw my emotions quite a lot. Um, so some people like to use emoji, for example, or use GIFs, animated GIFs, and those are ways we can express our emotions. We really don't have to use words. I love using metaphors as well. I know People say that autistic people don't do metaphors, but I find a lot of people do, and they might, we might just use them differently. We don't use the necessarily the typical metaphors and what they're supposed to mean. Like the idea of raining cats and dogs, for example, gives me anxiety. I don't want cats and dogs to fall from the sky. Sounds terrible. But um, the idea of like the ocean coming up or waves crashing over me or being tangled up in a wood or feeling like I'm as small as a tiny mite climbing over a leaf. Like those all feel like very immediately emotional feelings to me. And they might be different for you. You might have very different ways of imagining things. Maybe you don't have a very visual mind, but you might have a very sensory mind or a very auditory mind. You might think of music or textures. And those are all ways that you can make sense of your emotions and maybe even communicate them to other people. Um, Something I want to say that I know I sort of said good and bad earlier, and I put a sort of imaginary asterisk next to it. Um, Something I think is really important is there aren't good or bad feelings. Like there are feelings that we don't enjoy and feelings that we do enjoy, but they are all telling us something. It's all data. And I think sometimes we attribute meaning to feelings in a way that we say, I shouldn't feel this, right? For example, like, I don't know, I shouldn't feel annoyed at my friend for needing my time, or um, I don't know, I should enjoy Christmas. Okay. And um, I think as soon as we start using the word should, there's a question mark in there of who says for me, like who's putting in that should. Um, so when we feel a feeling, it's real. Like we're feeling it. It's what we do with it. It's what the sense we make from it, the actions and decisions that we take from it. That's where we get into like what's most helpful, what's most damaging, what's most harmful. The feeling itself is real, and I think we can do people we can do a lot of harm to ourselves and sometimes to others by trying to deny the feeling, by saying no, I'm not going to feel it. Because it'll just show up in other ways. Like people who are very afraid of feeling angry, for example, that anger will come out in other ways generally. Um, so being able to recognize that feeling sometimes can even lessen it, can, like feeling a sense of guilt over something we did wrong, for example, can help us go, okay, yeah, I did mess up there, but I meant well, or I'll learn to do better next time. Um, So let's talk about things that can help because I think that's important. And we're at 7:42. Goodness, time is going fast. Um, Something I'm going to do this quite quickly, I think, because it's a sort of aside in a way. Um, when we're feeling overwhelmed and we have like big things coming at us. So, for example, right now I've got a big talk in November that I'm quite anxious about. That feels like the big priority, right? That feels like something I have to tackle. Otherwise, I don't know, maybe the world will melt or something. It's not that big, but it feels like that big to me sometimes. Um, so some of you might experience that around like it could be a dispute or a difficult thing you need to do or a trauma that you're trying to process. And something I think is really important is that if we're feeling overwhelmed, it's really hard to deal with the big thing. So what can we do? Well, we can look at how we can reduce our load. Because, like we were talking about earlier, if we move outside of our window of tolerance, we're not able to handle anything very well anymore, let alone the big complicated thing, right? So, and that might be like you need to have an important conversation with someone, but if you're feeling super overwhelmed, it's really easy for that conversation to go sideways. Um, so ways to reduce our load, we're kind of going to go back to scanning. We're going to go back to like, how is my body? How is the environment around me? Are there uncertainties? Is there just too much on? Is my calendar looking too full? I have quite a visual calendar. It's all blocked out in different colors. And if I have too much of one color, I know something's a bit wrong. Is there a lack of clarity? So, like, do they not understand me or am I not understanding someone else? Uh, am I feeling a lack of control? What can I control now? What might I be able to control? Or do I actually need some help? Do I feel like I'm controlling too many things and I could do with some support? And these are all I've sort of left. I'll leave this checklist with you as something you can kind of look through to go, is there something I can take off my plate right now? So this isn't a this will solve the problem checklist. This is too much. What can I change? And it could be as simple as like the jumper I'm wearing right now is making me miserable. It's scratchy. And it might sound ridiculous, but it's like if I'm working with somebody who's, wanting to process some pretty difficult trauma and they're wearing a scratchy jumper, I'd encourage them to change the jumper first because please don't deal with the trauma when you're uncomfortable. That's just going to be worse. It's a bad time. If you're hungry, if you need to pee, those don't help, right? So it's great to be able to sort of just see what can I change just to make myself a bit more comfortable. And then we can start dealing with the big difficult things and we can get help or we can sort of start to process it more ourselves. And sometimes I think the big overwhelming things can start to feel a bit smaller as well, even if we don't have control over them. Once we've kind of expanded our window of tolerance, like it sort of makes sense, I think, right? Like once we have a bit more capacity, the big thing feels smaller. Like, the pile of washing up feels more doable because it's like, oh, actually, yeah, I've got time to do this. I can just put the radio on, listen to a good audiobook. Okay. So something that I'm sort of now going to talk a little bit about what we can do, both in terms of kind of how we can take care of ourselves when things are difficult, but I also want to really emphasize this is something we can think about when things are okay, um, or relatively okay, depending on how you're doing. I think that in our society, a lot of us are sort of pushed towards a kind of scarcity way of looking at things, that we only need support or we only need things that help us when things are really bad, or we only need the basic essentials for survival. And I don't think that helps us very much. I think if there's a way to sort of be generous, to provide ourselves with plenty. And I don't necessarily mean materially. I don't think we can necessarily all have access to that. And a lot of us don't, right? But if we're able to give ourselves plenty of some of the things that can nourish us, even if it's like, I'm going to give myself a bit more time for rest than I feel like I fully deserve. Don't need to go too much into what deserving means here, but like, um, I'm going to give myself more access to my interests than I necessarily need. I'm going to give myself more time off than I feel like I necessarily absolutely have to have. I know that not all of these things are possible, but it's about kind of looking at what is possible, I think. I'm going to give myself more time for my emotions or more time for my body. And it could be something as simple as like, yeah, I'm gonna stim for a while. I'm gonna play with that really satisfying fidget toy. I'm gonna use a back scratcher on my back or use one of those weird head things that feel good for some people and terrible for other people. I'm gonna stroke my cat. Actually, I have a dog. Um, And something else, I think, something that maybe helps us to access some of that, the things that we need plenty of, that we need more of, maybe than we're giving ourselves, is I call this reclaiming our weird ways of being. And to me, weird is not a pejorative. To me, weird is about being different, is about um, celebrating our difference. And I think that a lot of us have an intuitive sense, maybe when we're young, maybe when we're very young, potentially, about what can be helpful for us. Whether, like, if you kind of think about like those autistic kids who line up all their toys really satisfyingly, right? Or like kids who are like who put their cheeks. I used to always like I still do like I like to put my cheek against things to feel the texture against my face. Um, or like just spending time like moving in a way that can feel good for our bodies, or making sounds that feel good. Like I think a lot of us know to do that as kids because we know it's regulating or we know it does something for us, and we might be shamed out of it. We were told it's weird, right? We're told don't do it, or that's for babies, or don't play with Lego, that's for little kids. It's not true. Um, or like that makes you look, you know, wrong in some way, right? That's all these kind of ableist messages or other kind of normative messages that we might get. And something I sometimes ask the people I work with is, what felt good when you were little? And what would you like to reclaim? And it doesn't have to look the same as when we were little. Like it might look different now as an adult, but is there something that felt really good when you were young that you can now reclaim now and have for yourself? Have as something that can really help soothe you or excite you or give you a sense of joy or fulfillment or just calm. Um, and I think that can be a way to sort of connect with the things that we need. And if we make sure we have time for that, I think that really helps to expand our capacity day to day. Um, some useful things we can have in place, and this is a kind of list of more practical suggestions, and I'm happy to expand on any of these later if they'd be helpful. Um, So something I've sort of talked about with people is if they have a lot of meltdowns or shutdowns and it's really difficult, is to have a plan for them. So again, this is something to prepare when you're not actively having a meltdown or a shutdown. But it could either be something you write down for yourself on your phone. So it's saying, giving you like instructions on what to do. It could be like, go to your room, sit on the big bean bag, turn the lights down. Or it could be something you give to someone else. So it could be like, maybe maybe you have a partner who you like tight hugs from. So you might say like, give me a tight hug, take me to this room, don't talk to me, right? So you might agree on that plan in advance with somebody. Um, it might be like having a list of things that you can do. And I sort of suggest like having a box of objects. It could be like projects that you like doing that's really easy to pick up. So, for example, having some stickers or coloring in, or it could be having a nice blanket or fidget toys or something that you can sort of easily find soothing. Um, it can even be, like things that you find helpful to look at. Like, I really like watching videos of people building Lego sets, and I find that really soothing sometimes. So I'll just watch that for a while as a YouTube channel. I can get to very quickly if I need to. Um, and obviously, if you feel like you're getting towards burnout and stress, it's so important to put more of the things that you need in. I think that the experience of burnout in itself, it can be, those of you who've experienced it, it's really difficult, right? And I also think going through it can be traumatic. I think a lot of us are left fearful of experiencing it again after we come out of it. So knowing that we can have things in place to help us not get that deep into it again in the future can really help us sort of feel more able to get through, and I think feel more able to start to take more risks as well. Because I think the fear of burnout can be very limiting as well sometimes. Um, these are all things I think I've mentioned. One thing I haven't mentioned is asking for specific types of social time. So I think it's important that we don't always recognize that having social time with other people, there's different ways of doing that. And I don't think socially we're really taught that we can necessarily ask for different types of social time. So maybe starting to be able to do that, even modeling that for our friends can be quite helpful, right? To say like, I'm not really up for talking today, but can we just hang out? Or like, um, I want to do an activity together, but like side by side, like separate activities side by side. Or I need to vent. Are you up for listening? Oh, I didn't close that bracket. That's really bad. I'm sorry. Like, just imagine a bracket there, please. Um, I mentioned the making an agreement with friends, family, and that might extend beyond meltdowns and shutdowns as well. Of course, it can people sometimes find it helpful to do body doubling, for example, which is where like two people do tasks together that they both need to get done, but are both struggling to start. It might be asking someone to give you specific instructions on how to start a task. So, for example, if I'm really stuck with, I don't know, like doing the laundry, I might say to my partner, can you just tell me what to do and I'll do it step by step, and that can get me started. Right, I think we're just in the last few minutes. Hopefully I'll squeeze in some time for supporting each other actually, because that feels important. But very quickly, I want to talk about types of help. So yeah, we shouldn't have to do this all on our own. Um, and it's really important that we are able to access other support from elsewhere, because I think it's really hard to handle our mental health on our own. We have a society that I think sometimes tells us that we need to be resilient, that we need to handle things, and that isn't realistic. We're social. We're social as a species, and even if we really like our own company quite a lot, it can be helpful to have input from other humans, even if it's not directly, even if it's, for example, reading other people's writing about their experiences, or watching shows that can tell us a bit about other people's experiences, or hearing, um, things like hearing each other's experiences in groups like this. Obviously, yeah, counseling and therapy. Uh, I'm a counselor. I work with other autistic and neurodivergent people. There's directories online of autistic and neurodivergent counselors. I think Thriving Autistic is the one I can think of at the moment. Have been, and there are others. Um, and there are obviously that comes with a financial cost. I think it's if you struggle to pay for therapy, but you'd like therapy, it is always worth asking a therapist if they can do a discounted rate. Like people often keep a couple of spaces that are cheaper, for example, and if they have capacity, they will hopefully accommodate. Um, and yeah, like in terms of therapy, I feel it's important to say that um, you get to choose. Like you get to say that this doesn't feel right for you. One of the things that came out of my research around autistic people's experiences of talk therapies is that quite often we're not supported in or understood in the things that we need in therapy, whether that's how we communicate, how we even sit in the room, what we talk about, um, how much the therapist has an understanding of autism or neurodivergence or the stuff around that, for example. So, you know, you know yourself best, even if it doesn't feel like you know yourself well, you still know yourself generally better than the therapist does. And if something doesn't feel right for you, if the therapist doesn't feel helpful, um, you it's okay to say this isn't working. And if the therapist makes you feel bad about that, that's not okay. I sort of say that because I think a lot of us, and me included before I became a therapist, believed that there's a particular way to do therapy and that we could get it wrong. And I want to say that as clients, we can't get it wrong. And that's really important, I think. There's also coaching and mentoring services, working with other autistic people, for example. I think NDSA does some of that. Um, and yeah, talking with friends and family. And that's what I want to sort of talk about quickly just now in like 3 minutes, is looking after each other. Because I think um, a lot of us can, if we are in communities of other neurodivergent people, other autistic people, people who are different, like it can be such a big thing to meet other people who are like us. And I think we have such a huge capacity for care and empathy, despite what uh, outdated ideas about autism might suggest. And I think, feel a lot of we really do want to care for each other a lot of the time. We want to look after each other. And something that I notice in our communities is that sometimes that can be the difficulty, is that everyone is low on capacity and some of us are burning out from supporting others. Um, and I think maybe something that's important for us. And there's not, this is a very short time to talk about a big topic in a way, but I do think that it's important to really think carefully about, while we think about what our own capacity is, include in that what can I offer other people that I'm okay with, and what would I actually struggle with? And also, what do I need and want from other people? And can I communicate that clearly? Because I think sometimes what happens is we see the need, but what is being offered, either by ourselves or other people, is not what's actually needed. So, somebody might say, oh, like, I will do that for me, like, and I'm actually like, no, don't touch my stuff. Don't tidy my room for me. I actually just want your company, or I just want to be able to vent. So being able to communicate, think about and communicate what it is we actually want, and setting that boundary. And by boundary, I mean like saying, I do want your help, or I do care for you and I want your company, but I can't do this, or I need you to be able to help me with this. And if you can't, that's okay. But that's the company I need right now. So for me, sometimes with my friendships, I might say, I really want your company, but I can't be very communicative right now. So I wouldn't really be able to listen. Is that okay? Can we just hang out? And at other times, I'm like, yeah, I can listen today. That's fine. That's kind of all I really wanted to say about that. But I think it's something we don't think about enough within our communities. And maybe I'll have a chance to write more about that in the future. Um, and yeah, here are some resources. I can never keep these resources up to date. There was a time when it was possible to read every interesting book about autism that's coming out, and that's not the time anymore. It's not been the case for about 10 years. So here are some books that some colleagues have recommended me, and some that I have read as well, and also some websites that might be useful. And yeah, I'll make sure that a copy of these slides gets sent out to all of you. And I think I am just about on time. So thank you. And yeah, happy to answer any questions and have discussion. I'm going to stop the share now.